So we're coming up to Lag BaOmer. Mentioned yesterday, there are some days on the calendar that have taken on a life of their own. The truth is that Lag BaOmer is a very mysterious day. Even if you look in the sources that deal with it, go back and telling us the origins of Lag BaOmer, it's very, very unclear exactly what this day is, when it came about, why it came about. Just trying to understand a little bit, but there is actually a halachic nafkamina, particularly this year. Already there's an nafkamina tomorrow, Lag BaOmer, which is why we should talk about it now. One thing I will say, we don't have it this year. We are spared the discussion. When Lag BaOmer falls out of Motzei Shabbat, as it does. So in years past, there's always discussion. So when do you light the bonfires? When do you light the bonfires at Meron? Is it on Motzei Shabbat? Does it have to be the next day on Sunday? Now, it should be a davar pashut. It's so obvious that if it's going to be on Motzei Shabbat, this year it's Shetach Tzvei Sagur. The army has said nobody can go, it's dangerous, etc. So there's no discussion. But thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of, a couple of 100,000 people are going to go to the place. It's a mass event. Obviously, there needs to be police, there needs to be arrangements. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, we saw the terrible tragedy that took place in the crowd. So, but it's clear that these arrangements need to be made. The police have to be there. It's pikuach nefesh. And pikuach nefesh, in order to plan for such an event, so it takes time, it takes hours. You can't expect the police to arrive 5 minutes before. Okay, it's Israel. We do everything, 5 minutes before we'll show up. No, it takes time, it takes planning. What? No, but this is exactly the point. So a few years ago, Rami Brechiah was the Rav Mishtara, published an article about policemen who, because again, some of these shotrim are datiyim, you have observant policemen. If the event, despite the fact that the Rabbanut Rashid and all the Rabbanim and everybody said, don't have that laka on Motzei Shabbat, or at least, if it's going to be on Motzei Shabbat, postpone it by a few hours so that it will be, but lots of people didn't listen and they're going to have it anyway. So can the police, if that's the situation, are the police allowed to go on Shabbat in the afternoon to go and prepare to travel there? And he wrote a whole piece explaining why this would be permitted, because it's pikuach nefesh. So on the other hand, so he'll say, if that's the situation, that's what's going on. So all the people that are going at the beginning, going to the place, they're causing Chilul Shabbos to take place. Right? Once it's happening, and once it's there, you're the police, it's your job. They're going to be there. You're going to have 100,000 people, and brera, you've got to go, and you have to make sure that it's safe. And then, so every year there's this argument, and they say, well, we're just going to come. We're just going to come. If the police decide that they want to break Shabbos to come early, then that's their problem. That's a ridiculous argument. Of course, you're responsible. There's a siman that talks about the beginning of Hilchos Shabbat about whether you're allowed to go on a ship already from Wednesday. Right? Is a person allowed to go into a boat? And there are about 15 different, within, for a davar reshut, certainly, within 3 days before Shabbat, already you're not allowed to go on the ship. About 15 different explanations brought in the Rishonim as to why it is. It's the Gemara shows. One of the explanations is, you're going to go onto the boat now, and someone's going to have to, it's going to be a situation of pikuach nefesh when it's Shabbat, and somebody's going to have to be mechalel Shabbat for you, for pikuach nefesh. Once you're there, in malasot, but who said you're allowed to put yourself in that situation in the first place? So certainly that would be seem to be a similar case. As I said, this year it is hopefully a moot point. Hopefully, unfortunately, however we say it. But in any event, so what we know, Lag BaOmer is the day which seems to be the suspension or the end, termination of the mourning practices of Sfirat HaOmer. We'll see in a moment, it's actually not so clear that it's Lag BaOmer. Maybe it's a bit later, or maybe it's got nothing to do with this day. In fact, it's just an arbitrary number. Again, we think of Sfirat HaOmer, we associate it intuitively with the morning, right? Not shaving and not listening to music, etc. But of course, from the Torah, there is no such thing. Meaning, in the Torah, Sfirat HaOmer is Fartem Lachem Macharat HaShabbat, as we've discussed. It's the count to do with the Korbanot, counting from Pesach up to Shavuot. All the morning practices came in later. And the Shulchan Aruch tells us, based on Gemara Yevamot, it says, "Noagin shelo l'isa isha ben Pesach la'atzeret ad Lag BaOmer." So there are no weddings taking place from Pesach until Ben Pesach ad Lag BaOmer, until Lag BaOmer. Mipnei shebeoto zman metu talmidei Rabbi Akiva. During this time, it was when the talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died. 12,000 pairs, 24,000 students, and therefore we have these morning practices for them. So The Gemara says, Pesach ad Atzeret, from Pesach until Shavuot. So based on that, the pshat, it sounds like they died from Pesach until Shavuot, and the morning practices would be from Pesach until Shavuot. Okay. Well, most of us do not, we don't extend the entire period. And the Shulchan Aruch tells us, and when we get to Lag BaOmer, things, we cut it down a little. He says, Noagin shelo lestaper ad Lag BaOmer. So, and there's a big difference here between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. We don't have haircuts until Lag BaOmer. Sheomrim she'az pasku milamut. Very interesting language as well, because they say that that's when they died. And it's not right. Even the Shulchan Aruch, you read the language. I'm not sure what happened. They say They say that that was when they stopped dying on Lag BaOmer. But then he says, "Ve'en istaber ad yom lamed daled baboker." I say no. You have to wait until the 34th, until Lag BaOmer, right? Until the next day. Ela in ken lag erev Shabbat, unless Lag BaOmer is on Erev Shabbat. It's not the case this year, but if it was earlier, she'az mistaprim po mipnei kvod Shabbat. Meaning, according to the Shulchan Aruch, the day that you can shave is the 34th day of the Omer. Therefore, if the 34th day of the Omer is going to be on Shabbat, then you could shave before Erev Shabbat. But now, again, what's the 33, 34? Why does he say? There are those who say on Lag BaOmer, and we say actually you have to wait until the next day. So the Mishnah Berurah here explains. Where he says, Shomrim Sha'az Pasku, they say that's when they stop dying. He says, actually, after Gamba Yom Lamedaled Meitu, on the 34th day, they also died. The Mishum Zechmir Gam Kol Lamedaled Danetz, that's the source of the minhag to be machmir for that day as well. But if Shad, the Ikal Afsakaya, B'Yom Lamed Gimel, B'Yom Lamedaled Meitu like Mat. Most of them stopped dying by the 33rd day, and on the 34th day, only a few died, and therefore that's when you can. Okay, this is very, very strange. But that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. There's another factor here which we have to mention, which is when it comes to Avelut, we say Miktzat Yom Kekulo, and we consider parts of the day to be like the full day. So when a person Aleinu, a person sitting Shiva, Shloshim, whatever it is, so the final day of mourning, so long as you've kept the morning practice for part of the day, then that's enough, and you can already get up. So according to this, they were still dying on day 34, but day 34 we say Miktzat Yom Kekulo, and you can stop. And that's when you can go for a haircut. That's the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Rama, "B'mdinot elu ein noagin kidvarav." Right, that's usually true. He says in our place we don't follow the practices of the Shulchan Aruch. Ela mistaprim b'yom lamed gimel. We have a haircut a day early, 33. Not only that, umabim bo k'tzat simcha. This is a day of certain amount of simcha. Ve'ein umrim bo tachanun. That's not the reason for the simcha. I mean that we don't say tachanun, but in any event. And then he says, now he says again, we don't have a haircut until the 33rd day itself. I don't think you can get a hanacha on day 32. However, then this is the case now, this year. If lag is Motzei Shabbat, it's on Sunday, then then you can have a haircut on Friday in honor of Shabbat. He adds in another point, Mishu Bal Brit or Mal Beno. Somebody who has a Brit Milah during Sfirat HaOmer, again, that supersedes the Minhag HaAvelut on the day of the L'chvod the Brit. You can go and you can shave and you can have a haircut. There are those who wanted to prove from here as well. Discussion. A few people asked me regarding Yom HaTzmaut. Yom HaTzmaut, if one is allowed to shave or to have a haircut. So there are those who say in the same way that an individual who has a Brit Milah, that is a sort of an individual Yom Tov in a sense, is allowed to shave. So too, one would be able to do for the national reasons then. Okay, but so what do we see? So this year, the way it works out is that the Ashkenazim are allowed to shave and have haircuts tomorrow, because we would have to normally wait until day 33. But since day 33 is after Shabbat, so in honor of Shabbat, you can go to the Sfardim, but have to wait until day 34 anyway. So it's another day. So they would still have to wait until Sunday night. What's 33, 34, what's the difference? If they stop dying, some of them stop dying, all of them stop dying, what's the thing? So essentially, there are two opinions in the Rishonim as to exactly how this played out and when the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. What comes out from both opinions is that on Lag BaOmer itself, probably nothing happened. On the day of Lag BaOmer, nothing significant happened, which makes the whole thing so bizarre. He says, he brings over here the Biur Halacha. So he brings first of all, the Baal HaMaor. And the Baal HaMaor quotes a midrash that says like this. It says, Meitu mi Pesach ad pros atzeret. That's the language. They died from Pesach until pros atzeret. Now the Gemara learns out that the word pros, when it's relates to half of the month. Half of the month is called pros, and therefore half is 15. So it's 15 days. 15 days before Atzeret, before Shavuot, is when they stop dying. If we look at 15 days, so we get to day 34. So it was not Lag BaOmer. It was Lag BaOmer. That was day number 34. That was when they stopped dying, according to that opinion. The other opinion is Tosfot. And Tosfot says, actually, 33, 34, there was no specific day when this stopped. The deaths, the plague took place throughout the entire period of Sfirat HaOmer, from Pesach through to Atzeret, except, mentioned before, the days on which you don't say Tachanun. That's what he says. He says on the days on which we don't say Tachanun, i.e. the days that have a certain festive nature to them, like Shabbat and Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, on those days the Talmidim didn't die. So it continued throughout the period, but it was only certain days within. And when you work out that calculation, then we get to 33 days. That's also not so straightforward. Yeah, how to get to the calculation. The Be'er Halacha works it out. But he says, for example, he says, he counts 7 days of Pesach. Remember, Sfirat HaOmer, we only start counting on the second day. So it should be 6 days of Pesach. So he says, Pesach. Okay, so he was in Chutz La'aretz. So already you got 6 days, 7 days. That's the thing. He adds in 2 days Rosh Chodesh Iyar, 1 day Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Of course, going back, it could change. It could be 1 day, it could be 2 days. This could all change. But in any event, so that's so we have 2 different ways of looking at it. That either we're now at the milestone, sort of when the deaths of the Talmidim stop taking place, which again would seem to be on Lag BaOmer, but it's actually not. It's actually the next day. Or it would be that you just make the calculation of how many days. 33 days was what happened, and therefore, by the time we get to 33, that's the number of days that we have to observe. It was not necessarily consecutive. Based on that opinion of the Tosfot, so this is where we have the Rama says, and the Mishnah Berurah brings, there are different minhagim as to when we observe these 33 days. If it's not that on this day specifically something happened, so you could observe it. There are those who had the minhag to observe from the beginning of the Omer, from Pesach, all the way until Lag BaOmer. And there were those who say no, and this was the more prevalent minhag in Ashkenaz, and probably for other reasons as well, that you would start observing from Rosh Chodesh Iyar, already from the 2nd of Iyar, going all the way until Shavuot. So the Taz and Ad is right, that the reason why that was more prevalent is because during this period, later on, also more terrible tragedies occurred, pogroms during the Crusades and others, and therefore that became more of the mourning period. But nowadays there are different minhagim amongst the Ashkenazim as well. Based on all of that, what is the significance of Lag BaOmer? It doesn't seem to be matched. Again, it was chosen as a date somewhat arbitrarily, but that's the date that was chosen on which we either cancel the morning practices, or we suspend the morning practices, or we almost cancel the morning practices. Later on, it's brought in the Zohar that this is the day of the Hilula of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that is when everything starts to heat up. Right? We saw yesterday there are testimonies already going back 500 years ago that this was on this day. People would come to Meron with the bonfires and everything. And we'll say again, it's become very popular in recent years, because in recent years people are less concerned about the bonfires and more concerned about the barbecues. But that is certainly not written anywhere. But throughout the generations, it's been a controversial topic. The Khatam Sofer, famously, was very, very opposed to this whole idea of Lag BaOmer, of going to Meron. He writes in a number of places, a number of his tshuvot, that it might even be a chashash of Baal Tosef, of adding on an extra holiday, which we've never heard of, we've never seen of. So he was not in favor of that. But there are others who do. Either way, bottom line is that tomorrow, Erev Shabbat, Ashkenazim amongst us, you can get a haircut, and you can shave. It's what Shabbat, and that is permitted. Rabbi Hanania ben Akash אומר שהקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל, לפיכך בא להם תורה מצוות, שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיר תורה ויהדות.